thank Rabbi Pilichowski for taking time out of his Erev Shabbos to share some of the inspiration, the magic of Yom Yerushalayim with us. And to remind everyone that at 10 a.m. this morning, we will have a conversation with Rabbi Uri Pilichowski, the Chief of Staff to the American Ambassador to Israel. I'm going to introduce Rabbi Goldberg, who will introduce our esteemed speaker this morning, Rabbi Uri Pilichowski.
Good morning and Chag Sameach, happy Yom Yerushalayim to all. Thank you so much for joining us, and a very special thank you to my dear friend Rabbi Pilichowski. We are familiar with Rabbi Pilichowski because he and his amazing wife, the mayor of his community, she was the mayor of Boca Raton when she was here unofficially, so it's not surprising. Spent several years here in Boca Raton, and in a very short time really had an enormous impact on our community. Not only the teens, who they touched so deeply, but the whole community, who they inspired in such really beautiful ways. And since they brought their talents to Mitzvah Yericho, to Yerushalayim, to the magnificent scenery that we see behind Rabbi Pilichowski, and Rabbi Pilichowski has continued to lead the way as an advocate, a staunch advocate for Israel, the U.S.-Israel relationship. He's been a dear, dear friend to me and to our community, and I've had the privilege to be with Rabbi Pilichowski at some really special places and some really special times on some really special occasions. Perhaps none more amazing than we were together at the embassy opening in Yerushalayim just 2 years ago, which give even greater significance to what this day is, this historic day, Yom Yerushalayim, a day Jews longed for throughout our history, to be able to have Yerushalayim, to go to Yerushalayim, the united eternal capital of the Jewish people, now home to the United States Embassy. And people don't know that Pilichowski works hard behind the scenes on a lot of the aspects of the U.S.-Israel relationship, in addition to being vocal on social media and fighting the battles there, but so much behind the scenes as well. So Rabbi, thank you for being with us. Thank you so close to Shabbos, giving us your time from the Pilichowski Palace in Mitzvah Yericho. We appreciate it very, very much, and we wish you a wonderful Shabbos, a happy Yom Yerushalayim. We send our best to the mayor and to the whole family.
Thank you.
And without further ado, the great, the one, the only Rabbi Uri Pilichowski.
Okay, thank you very much. And our time in Boca wasn't just an inspirational time for us, but it was also transformative for us in so many different ways. And we still remember Boca very fondly and love going back to visit. And especially treasure my relationship with Rabbi Goldberg and Rabbi Moskowitz and really the entire Boca Raton community. I still work for NCSY, so I still have a ton of students in Florida. So it's really a pleasure and really an honor. There's probably no greater honor that a person could have than being asked to share Torah thoughts with the community. So I'm very much appreciative of Rabbi Goldberg and Rabbi Moskowitz for asking me, and for the entire community for getting up at 9 a.m. on an Erev Shabbos and deciding to tune in. I just want to say that first of all, your talk that you have at 10 o'clock, if you have to choose between the talk at 9 o'clock and the talk at 10 o'clock, Rabbi Lightstone is a dear friend, and you're in for a really, really special treat. There's probably very few people in Israel right now who are having as much of an impact on the Jewish future as Rabbi Lightstone. So that's really exciting that you're going to be able to hear from him. So definitely stay and tune into that talk. Rabbi Moskowitz made a joke about the virtual background, where you have so many Zoom shiurim and calls that virtual background. And I thought of it, at this time of day, it's really a mistake to do a broadcast outside because the sun's behind you and you can't really see the face so much. So I thought of doing this from my study, and then I realized I'd just be robbing you of so much. And in the choice between seeing my face and the beauty behind me, I think that it's much more important that you get to see the beauty behind than the beauty of my face. So I made the decision to have the talk outside, even though I know my face is probably very much deep in shadow for you. Just want to tell you what you're looking at behind you, because it is Yom Yerushalayim today, but in a certain sense, it's much more than just Yom Yerushalayim, because in 53 years ago, we didn't just get a united Yerushalayim. We didn't just have the great nace of having a Yerushalayim united and under our control, but it was all of Yehuda v'Shomron. It was all of Judea and Samaria. And that's where I am right now. That's where I'm standing. I'm standing halfway between Yerushalayim, which is straight in front of me, is behind, I guess, your camera view, to the west. We pray to the west here, not towards the east. And behind me to the east, you have the entire Jordan Valley. And what you're looking at, the city over there, is Yericho. So this is really the Petach Tikva of Israel, not the city, but the opening of hope of Israel, is where Yeshua came in a mere 10-minute drive from here, where Yeshua came into Eretz Yisrael, and this is where it all began. So having this under our shlita, under our control for the last 53 years has been nothing short of miraculous, and it's a real special treat. So you get to see that behind you. It's a little windy today. It's the desert, but the heat has broken, so it's a pleasure to be outside, and it's just a wonderful day to commemorate and to celebrate having Yerushalayim under our control. I want to try to tackle something which has troubled me for decades, and that is the sort of feeling that we have about Yerushalayim. I'm not one to generally give talks on feelings. That's not my area of expertise. But I thought that we all have that sense when we go to the Kotel, when we go to, if for those that go to Har Bayit, when you enter into the city of Yerushalayim, especially now when you go to Ir David, and if you haven't been to the city of David, to Ir David, and seen the excavations there, I highly recommend it on your next trip, maybe very, very soon, to Eretz Yisrael. There's a special feeling you get. They just opened up in Ir David a pathway that the Jews used to take this road on their walk up to the Beis Hamikdash, and I choke up just talking about it. But the uniqueness of being able to walk on the same stones and the same path, and the walk up to Yerushalayim, and you get out of this sort of underground tunnel and you walk up to the southern wall of the old city, and you realize this is where everybody was. This is where it is, and there's sort of this feeling. So what is that feeling? We all know what I'm referring to. We all know, but it's so hard to encapsulate into words and to say what we're feeling about. And when we talk about on the end of our Pesach Seder and the end of Yom Kippur, sometimes the most emotional moments are not all the stuff that comes before, which is so much more important, but it's when we hear L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim. And that sentiment, and trying to express that sentiment to people in talks. A lot of the talks that I give are to people that don't understand what Yerushalayim is all about. They don't understand why the Jewish people are so connected to this land, and to try to explain it to them, to try to put it into words that Uganda wouldn't be good enough, and giving up half Yerushalayim is inconceivable to us. Is very hard to express what this all means to us, and that's what I want to sort of try to capture and to explain what Yerushalayim, this gravitational pull, I call it, that we have towards Yerushalayim. Why is it so special to us? We don't even get this sense a lot of times from our own hometown. And a lot of times Jews who for the first time come to Yerushalayim have never seen it, don't really understand it, are at the Kotel on a birthright trip, and they're standing at the Western Wall and they're looking up at these old stones, and it means so much to them, and they don't understand why. They can't understand why it is. There's an unfortunate joke that I like to tell, because it's unfortunate, but it's really it's true so much, which is the story is told of a Pesach Seder, a beautiful Pesach Seder. There are grandparents at the Pesach Seder, and there are the siblings, which are at the adult level, and all the cousins and the grandchildren are together, and it's a Seder that's the Divrei Torah are amazing. The singing was great. The feeling of a family united is just permeated throughout the entire Seder, and the family is so inspired and they're so uplifted by this beautiful Seder. They start singing L'Shana Haba together at the end of the Seder, and they're dancing around their dining room joyously, just singing L'Shana Haba, and they can't stop except for one person at the Seder, the hostess. The mother of the Seder is sitting at the table furious. She's beside herself, and her husband comes over to her and says, "Honey, why are you so upset? Why, this is so beautiful. We did a beautiful Seder together. The whole family loves it. Why are you so angry? Why are you so upset at this?" And she said, "Look how beautiful this is. I don't know if it'll be like this if we go to Yerushalayim. I don't know if I want to be in Yerushalayim next year. I want to be here next year." And unfortunately, a lot of us have that sense also of trepidation over Yerushalayim, of we don't know what the future would hold in a special Yerushalayim. So that's also a second sense that we have of when we walk Yerushalayim's stones and we say this is what we're hoping for, we're praying for. 3 times a day we pray to go back to Yerushalayim, and that Yerushalayim should be rebuilt. So the question of is this something that we could really have and really appreciate, and what would we do when we get here? That's also an emotion that has to be touched upon. I want to tell a true story. That was obviously not. I hope that story wasn't true. I want to tell a true story that comes up in Sefer Yirmiyahu. Which a lot of people aren't familiar with the story. It's almost unbelievable. You would think that it's one of these homiletic stories from the Talmud, from the Gemara, that comes to teach us a lesson. But this story does teach us a lesson, but it's actually a true story, and it's unbelievable to think about this. It actually occurred not far from here. It couldn't have taken more than a 20-30 minute drive. My direction back here that I'm pointing is up north of here, between Shiloh and Yericho and Yerushalayim. And the story is after the destruction of the first Beis HaMikdash. So the first Beis HaMikdash is destroyed. The Babylonians had come in, they destroyed it, and they had appointed Gedaliah as the governor, right? We know Tzom Gedaliah because Gedaliah was eventually assassinated, unfortunately, and we still commemorate that tragedy because that was the sealing of our exile when the Jews were out of Eretz Yisrael. And this was a group of 80 Jews that lived up north about Shiloh. When I say up north, I mean north is Samaria. In the Shomron. They weren't living in the Galil or in the Golan Heights, but north of Yerushalayim. And it's a group of 80 Jews that it's incredible when you hear this, and it's so incredible that the Radak, one of our great Rishonim, questions how this story could even be true. He doesn't understand how a story like this could have ever have happened. But the story is told of 80 Jews who are marching their way with their korbanos to come to the Beis HaMikdash to give korbanos in Yerushalayim. And they had not heard that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. It's incredible. The Babylonians had been here for years. They had laid siege to Yerushalayim. They had eventually broken the walls of Yerushalayim, and on Tisha B'Av had burnt the Beis HaMikdash to the ground, completely destroyed it. And these Jews had no idea. They didn't know. They had never heard. It's incredible. And they're marching down with their korbanos, and they get to Arei Yehuda. We're in, right, this could be Arei Yehuda, the area of Arei Yehuda, the cities of Judah, which was the seat of the royal kingdom of the Jewish people. This is special cities. There is special halachic significance to these cities that other cities in Eretz Yisrael don't have. And they get to Arei Yehuda, and they see it destroyed. They see the cities of Arei Yehuda bechorbanah. They see it completely destroyed, and they're beside themselves. How were they destroyed? These were full cities. These are full Jewish cities. How are they destroyed? And they rip kriya, they tear their shirts in a sign of mourning, which is what we do now as well. We don't do this over Arei Yehuda because we don't see the remnants of the city, but if we did, we would also tear kriya over Arei Yehuda. It's a halacha in the Shulchan Aruch. So they see the cities of Judah and they're destroyed, and then they hear the horrific news. They hear this horrific news that Jerusalem was destroyed. And they're besides themselves that Yerushalayim was destroyed, that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, and they absolutely can't believe it. And this raw sense of Yerushalayim being destroyed, of this special city, it's incredible, and it was repeated 20 years ago. If you could imagine such a thing, 20 years ago, this exact same story happened. I heard this story from Rabbi Beryl Wine. He printed it in one of his svarim, and it's an incredible story. It boggles our mind how this could be true. How could it be true at the time of the Beis HaMikdash, and how it could be true today is incredible. But when the first Ethiopians had come to Israel, and these are people who were disconnected from the larger Jewish world for over 2,500 years. And they get to Israel, and there's a lot. I mean, I'm an immigrant to Israel, and I can tell you how hard it was to adjust to a new culture. I can't even imagine what the Ethiopians, what each of them went through. And something that we don't realize, unfortunately, is that when the Ethiopians came to Israel, they had trekked for months through a desert, and about a third of them died on the way. They don't tell these stories to us, but this is the truth. I have Ethiopian neighbors who I talk to, and hear their tragic stories of coming to Israel. It's horrific, and then the joy of getting here. But what they left behind and who they left behind is horrific. The Ethiopians put their kids into schools, right? There were public schools and religious schools for those that were interested, and a first grade teacher. A first grade teacher comes home one day. She probably had meetings after school. She comes home one day, and outside of her home are all the parents of her Ethiopian students waiting outside their house, angry. Outside of her home, they found out where she lived. Israel is a little different than America. If there's not as much, privacy. And they found out where she lived, and they were furious at her. And she comes home. She doesn't understand what she did wrong. There weren't any children in the class that were crying. There were no fights that day. So what could possibly be the problem that they're so upset about? And they said to her, "Why are you lying to our children and telling them the most horrible things?" And she said, "I don't know what you mean." And they said, "You told our children that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed, that the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. That's not true." And you imagine her what? And they said, "What do you mean? We're here. We came back to Israel. We came to Eretz Yisrael in order to go to Yerushalayim. We can't wait to go see the Beis HaMikdash. We've only heard about the Beis HaMikdash." The Ethiopians had left Israel. Their ancestors had left Israel before the destruction of the Beis HaMikdash. And they never heard. 2,500 years, the Ethiopians lived in Ethiopia thinking that in Yerushalayim there was a Beis HaMikdash. And life had just continued. And normally they had left, but the rest of their Jewish brothers and sisters had continued on with Jewish life as it's supposed to be. Tuma and Tahara and Karbanos and all the different various things that we read about, and it seems so distant to us, to them was very relevant. It was something relevant. It was something that they felt that they had, that they couldn't wait to perform. And now this teacher was despicably lying to their children about a tragedy that you should never joke about. And she had to tell them, it's just so sad. She had to tell them that the Mikdash was destroyed some 2,000 years before. A second Beis HaMikdash. They didn't even know about such a thing. That's the raw sense of feeling that we should have over Yerushalayim. When we think about Jerusalem, all too often we think about the hotel that we're going to stay at. We think about the new light rail, the shops, the restaurants, and that's all beautiful and great. But Yerushalayim means so much more to us. It has so much more meaning to us than just a city that's a modern city that's thank God, being built as we speak. I want to try to shine a light on three different parts of Jerusalem, three different aspects of Yerushalayim to us. The historical ties that we have to Yerushalayim. I want to talk about the Shechina, that Shora there, what that means, that God's presence is in Yerushalayim, and the place of us as an Or Goyim, as a light onto the nations, as a way of sort of the seat of our foreign policy, as it may, as Yerushalayim. And those are the three aspects that I want to look at. And the first place I want to look is the Rambam. The Rambam discusses in his Laws of the Beis HaMikdash. And the Rambam, for those that aren't familiar with the writings of the Rambam wrote a work called the Mishnah Torah. And the Mishnah Torah is a work that's largely focuses on halacha. It focuses on Jewish law. And it's a very, I don't want to call it dry, because halacha is such a fluid and exciting area of study, so it's never dry if studied right. But if you're looking at the Mishnah Torah for some great philosophy, or you're looking at the Mishnah Torah for some great stories, you're going to be sorely disappointed. That's not what you're going to find there. You're going to find halacha. But when the Rambam discusses the laws of the Beis HaMikdash and building the Beis HaMikdash and what has to go into the Beis HaMikdash and the size of different areas of the Beis HaMikdash, the measurements in the Beis HaMikdash, so he starts off with the history of the Beis HaMikdash. And he talks about He talks about the different things that occurred in the Beis HaMikdash. He talks about how Har HaBayis Har Moriah, the Temple Mount, which I have to tell you, I know I'm peppering this talk with a lot of stories, but I have to tell you, there's from next time that you come to Eretz Yisrael, for those that live in Eretz Yisrael that are watching now, the next time you come to Yerushalayim, do me a favor, do something different. We generally, as tourists or as Americans, we generally come to Yerushalayim from the west part of the city. That's where we come. That's where we approach Yerushalayim from the west part of the city. We come from Tel Aviv, right? If we're coming straight from the airport, so then of course we come straight from the airport, and we're coming from the west. You know, if you're in a map, if you're looking at a map, from the Mediterranean sort of, and approaching Yerushalayim that way. Next time you come to Yerushalayim, do something a little different. Go around. It'll take you an extra 20-25 minutes. Go around Yerushalayim and come up Yerushalayim from the east. Come from the east, from like the road from the Dead Sea. That's where I come from. That's where I live. And my road, I live about a 15-minute drive from Yerushalayim. And when I enter Yerushalayim, I enter onto Har HaTzofim, to Mount Scopus. Okay, a lot of times we've gone to Mount Scopus and seen the view from the beautiful outlook there. Take that approach, and then you'll see Har HaBayis. You get to see the Temple Mount as a mountain. Because the old city is so developed when you come in from the west, we don't really get a sense of what the Temple Mount itself looks like. But if you come in from the east, you see sort of the valley, the Kidron Valley that's dug out around Har HaBayit, and then you get to see the Temple Mount in all its glory, with the walls of the old city going down the entire east. It's a completely different view. And if that's your first look in a while at Yerushalayim, you get a completely different sense of the place. And that mountain, David HaMelech had purchased. David HaMelech purchased that mountain, and that's where the Rambam starts. But he goes back. That, the Rambam says, our tradition tells us, is where Adam, Harishon, the first person, the first human being, offered the first korban, the first offering to Hashem. And where his children, Cain and Hevel, unfortunately gave their korbanos, their offerings, which started the first fight and the first murder that occurred. Noach, according to many of our great rabbis, gave his korban when he stepped out of the table, when he stepped out of the ark. He gave his korban on Har HaBayis, on the Temple Mount. The Akedah, when Yitzchak and Avraham went up to the mountain, and Avraham was under the impression that he was going to have to sacrifice his son, and the confusion and that incredible moment, and then at the last second, as Avram has the knife ready, a malach, an angel of Hashem, calls out Avram, and tells him not to do it, that's not the will of God. That happened on the Temple Mount. Historically, so much of our past has occurred on that one special mountain. It's not the highest mountain in Jerusalem. It's not the most impressive mountain in Jerusalem from an aesthetic point of view. But when you're staring down at that mountain and you see the mountains rise up around about the valleys above it, which is why it takes an aliyah to go up to the mountain, because everything around the Har HaBayis, everything around the Temple Mount is dug down. When you walk up, it's literally breathtaking. Not so much, again, from the beauty of it all, but more from the sense of what has occurred on this mountain. There's rare to find any spot in the world that has as much history in our people, in our tradition, as Har HaBayis. And of course, that's where David and then Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash, where Ezra and his Beis Din would then come back from Bavel in the second temple and rebuild the second temple, where the Maccabeim fought off the Greeks and were able to reestablish the Beis HaMikdash. The history goes on, and then that awesome moment when 53 years ago today, when Rav Goren blew the shofar and told the Jewish people that Har HaBayit bi'adenu. There is a great gadol, great Torah giant in Yerushalayim today. His name is Rav Shlomo Fisher. Rav Shlomo Fisher, if you can picture the embodiment of Yerushalayim in a person. He's used to be the Av Beis Din, the chief rabbinical judge of Jerusalem, and he's lived in Yerushalayim essentially his entire life. He's a fourth generation Yerushalmi. The man today is in his late 80s, and we used to have a great zechut, a great merit of having Rosh Shlomo Fisher eat at our table the first time we got to live in Eretz Yisrael, when we lived in Mivaseret Zion. And every 4 or 5 weeks, Rav Fisher, through some great hashgacha that somehow shined upon us, would sit at our table and join us for Shabbat. Him and his wife, and his wife was a high school principal at the time, and in 1967. And they lived on the border with Jordan. They lived in Mea Sharim, so they lived on the border with Jordan. And as the shells fell, they waited. The people of Yerushalayim waited. These are the stories you don't read in books. These are the stories you have to hear from somebody that was there. She said that they would wait until they saw the Jordanian soldiers on the other side of the street, and then they would pull back. But until that point, they wouldn't. And she talks about how in 1967, how the schools had made a decision. She disagreed with it, and her school did not do this, to keep the children during the 6-Day War in school. It's especially with what's going on today, you can't even imagine such a thing. But they felt that the kids would be safer at school than if they were at home. So she vehemently disagreed and dismissed all of her students to go home. And she found out that her daughter, who attended a different school, had broken her leg running. I don't know if she was running in the building, outside the building, but she had heard that she had broken her leg. And she ran to get her daughter and bring her to Shari Tzedek, to the hospital that we're all familiar with in Yerushalayim. And she walks into the emergency room at Shari Tzedek. Now, this is in the middle of a war, right? So you can imagine, right? They talk about long lines and whether you get to really get seen right away. But she walks in, and there are a pile, just piled up, of bodies in the emergency room. They didn't have enough space to put all the soldiers who had unfortunately lost their lives, civilians who had lost their lives in the Jordanian shelling. And she talks about this horror, sitting with her daughter, who's obviously crying and screaming in pain and trying to make sense of everything. And then she tells the story, the world stops. Because then somebody runs into the ER and screams those words, Har Habayit Biyadenu, the Temple Mount is in our hands. And how everything at that point just completely came to a stop. And even with all the tragedy and all the horror that was surrounding them, everybody broke out into cheer. To hear such a thing, they couldn't even imagine that they then had control of Har Habayit. So that's the history of the place. And may we one day, very soon, merit to be able to go back onto Har Habayit. That's our historical connection. And maybe that's part of this unclear gravitational pull that we have towards Jerusalem that's so hard to describe, is maybe the history behind it. Sorry about that. Okay. The wind is quite strong in the desert. Okay. But maybe there's something else that we could say as well. Maybe we could point to a different sense of what draws Yerushalayim, and that is something that's very hard to describe, which is the Shechina. And we're told that the Kedusha of the Beis HaMikdash, of the Temple Mount in Yerushalayim, has never left. In different parts in Eretz Yisrael, we have lost the Kedusha of Eretz Yisrael, and this has a lot of significance when it comes to halacha. Whether or not we have to keep certain laws of Shemitah and Trumas and Maasros, and whether the tithes that we take, whether they have to be on a Torah level, on a rabbinic level. But we're told that the Kedusha of Yerushalayim has never left, because the Shechina is always Shorah. The Shechina manifests itself. God's presence manifests itself. Now, this is a very strange concept, and is almost the antithesis of everything that Judaism believes in, because Judaism believes very strongly that God has no physicality. So what does it mean that God is Shorah, that the Shechina is manifest in Yerushalayim? What I've heard from my Rebbe, the explanation that I heard, that makes a great deal of sense to me. And if this doesn't make sense to you, then you have to find your own explanation. as to what this is. But what does it mean that the Shekhinah, that the divine presence rests in Yerushalayim, rests at the Temple Mount and has never left? What's the idea behind that? And that's that there has to be a central place where Jews can go and learn about HaKadosh Baruch Hu, learn His great Torah. And that area, that one central place, that is what it means that the divine presence rests there. And so what does it mean for us as Jews when we used to go to the Temple Mount? So when we think about this, thousands of years ago, what would the experience be like when we went to Yerushalayim, when we would go to the Temple Mount? So it would be noisy, we can imagine, right? There were animals around, and there were tons of people around. So the silence that sometimes we like to think about, that probably didn't exist at the Temple Mount. There were Kohanim walking around in their special clothes. We could picture that. There were Levim that were guards that would make sure that people didn't cross into areas that they weren't allowed to cross into. But one of the most remarkable parts of Yerushalayim is that it was the seat of the Sanhedrin, that the greatest Torah scholars of the generation were there. And part of going to Yerushalayim was being able to hear shiurim, hear Torah lessons from some of the greatest minds of the time, of the day, and grappling with some of the biggest issues of the day. And it was an area where we could conquer our doubts about God, where at certain points of the day we could see miracles in front of us. You just saw the wind that we have here in Eretz Yisrael, right? This sometimes we have this powerful wind. It knocked the whole computer over and the whole camera over a minute ago. But in Yerushalayim and the Mizbeach, the smoke would rise straight up. It did not make a difference if it was a pouring, rainy winter day or a spring day like today with a heavy wind. You would always see the smoke rise straight up to Shemayim. And imagine standing in a windy day. You're holding onto your hat, you're holding onto your kippah, you're trying to keep everything together, you're grabbing onto your children, and you just look straight and you see this column of smoke, untouched by the wind. And you know that the laws of nature are being broken right in front of your eyes. That can't happen unless there's a miracle. All sense of doubt about God, about existence, just fades away. And you can imagine standing half a mile away, looking at that pillar of smoke and just knowing that there is a creator, that there is a control of the world, that there is hashgacha, there is providence, that is controlling the world, and all doubt fades away. That's the idea of the Shekhinah being Shorah, of the divine presence being manifest in Yerushalayim. And that part, that's the city that HaKadosh Baruch Hu chose. So when we go to Yerushalayim today, we're not visiting a city where miracles used to happen. We're not visiting a place where the past and the history and all of the miracles of the divine used to occur, and we talk about how if only it would happen again, if only the Shekhinah would be Shorah again, if only the divine presence would manifest itself again, but it never left. When we go to Yerushalayim, when we go to Har Bayis, it's a rendezvous with God. We have this opportunity to stand before God. That, in 2,000 years since the Beis HaMikdash was taken down, has never stopped. And that's an amazing, amazing thing. And maybe, somehow, I can't explain this. I don't know. I don't understand it, so I definitely can't explain it. But maybe it's not just the sense of history that pulls us to Yerushalayim. But maybe it's that experience that we know somehow deep down in our soul, we know that the Shekhinah is Shorah in Yerushalayim. We know that this is our opportunity to have a rendezvous with God in a place. Not just in our hearts, not just in our minds, but to stand in a place and know that you are standing before God. Maybe that's the gravitational pull that is Yerushalayim. Again, I didn't promise that we'd be able to explain it. The last aspect of Yerushalayim that I want to focus on is the idea of Yerushalayim as the seat of our outreach to the world. And this is the idea of Kimitzion Teitzei Torah Udvar Yerushalayim, Udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. That we talk about Kimitzion Teitzei Torah, we know it, it's a pasuk that's familiar to all of us. It actually appears twice in Tanakh. And when we generally say that when the Torah stems from Zion, the Torah comes out from Zion, and the word of God comes from Yerushalayim, so we generally think of the Sanhedrin. We generally think of the high court and there were actually 3 different Sanhedrins on Har Bayit in Yerushalayim. There were 3 courts. The highest of the courts was the Sanhedrin Hagadol. But there were 3 lower courts that were also found on the Temple Mount. And that's generally what we think about when we think about Kimitzion Teitzei Torah, that the Torah comes out of Zion. It should really be Sinai Teitzei Torah, that the Torah came from Har Sinai, like we say in Pirkei Avos. But it's not, it's Mitzion Teitzei Torah, and we generally assume what that means, excuse me, what that means is that the Torah instruction is sent out from Yerushalayim. And that would make sense for today. Because if you walk the streets of Yerushalayim, there are, and I say this in a literal sense, hundreds of yeshivot and day schools and even a non-religious public school in Israel is learning Torah. They're learning Tanakh. There are hundreds of thousands of people studying Torah on a daily basis in Yerushalayim. Some of the greatest Rabbanim of the world today live in Yerushalayim. The Svarim that are written generally today, the Svarim that people use generally, are printed, published, and written in Jerusalem, in Yerushalayim. So when we talk about Kimitzion Teitzei Torah, for many of us, that's a literal idea, that the Torah does come from Yerushalayim. Right, it does come from Yerushalayim today. Much of our Torah stems from Yerushalayim. But there's an added aspect. If you look into the pasuk and look into the commentaries of Kimitzion Teitzei Torah, and you see what they say, especially if you look at the Radak, he doesn't talk about the Torah in a sense of Jewish people having instruction from the Torah, but rather what he refers to is that it's to the nations of the world, that the Jewish values that we are supposed to show to the world, that we're supposed to be an Or LaGoyim, a light onto the nations, that stems from Yerushalayim. That comes to Yerushalayim. And we talk about great times in our history. Think about the Shlomo HaMelech and his time when world leaders would come to Yerushalayim just to see what Jerusalem was all about. And I have to tell you something. It's happening today as well. World leaders flock from everywhere to come to Yerushalayim. And yes, maybe you'll say it's more about our high tech than our Torah and our values, but I don't believe that to be true. I think people realize, even the communist China, I think they understand that there's something unique happening in Yerushalayim. There's something special that happens in this city. There's a pull that they sense, and world leaders are flocking to Jerusalem. Last year, Prime Minister Netanyahu released an incredible statistic. He said that on average, they have visits from foreign ministers or foreign presidents twice a week in Yerushalayim. On average. And the door doesn't stop in terms of being knocked over and over to come see what Yerushalayim is all about, to see the miracle of Yerushalayim. And let's be honest with ourselves. I'm not so sure there's such miracles going on that deserves the world's attention today. But there's that gravitational pull. There's that pull that everybody, Jew and Gentile alike, have to Yerushalayim. It fits in with the Rambam's explanation as to why Yerushalayim wasn't mentioned in the Chamishei Chumshei Torah. The word Yerushalayim doesn't appear. It talks about the place that God chose. But the word Yerushalayim never appears in the Torah. It appears in Tanakh, but not in the Torah. And why? Because he gives 3 reasons. We'll focus on one. Because everybody would fight over it. Everybody would say, so this way, the only way people can claim that they know about Yerushalayim is through us. Because we're the ones that identified where it is, where this city is that God chose, and what it is. And maybe that's what pulls everybody to Yerushalayim is this idea that the values that Yerushalayim stands for, the values of the Torah, that's something that we can give to the world, that we contribute to the world. Probably our greatest gift to the world are the values that we brought, the values of ethical monotheism, of believing in one God, and that belief in one God requires a certain way of acting, a certain way of ethics, that we act in a kadosh type of way, in a way that's sanctified and sacred. And that lesson comes from Yerushalayim. Maybe that's the third aspect of what pulls us to Yerushalayim, is this deep sense within us that we know and that we're aware of, that we should be teaching the world about the values, and maybe the world wants that. And maybe each of us, deep down, want to experience those values and teach those values, and know that by coming to Yerushalayim, we'll surround ourselves in those values. And it'll be so much easier because we're in one spot. So we started off with a series of different stories and different parts of Yerushalayim through history and what it's meant to us, and talked about different aspects of Yerushalayim, all in an effort to try to describe and explain the unexplainable, the connection of the Jewish people to Yerushalayim. And as we sit here 53 years after what we call Yom Yerushalayim, which is a fascinating day in Israel today, because it's really only celebrated by a portion of the population. Most of the population of Israel really doesn't even know that today is Yom Yerushalayim, especially under Corona, because generally in Yerushalayim there's a parade. There's no parade this year. So there's no real publicity surrounding Yom Yerushalayim today. So many of the people don't recognize that it's Yom Yerushalayim here in Israel. But for a certain segment of the population that appreciates what Yerushalayim is all about and appreciates what happened 53 years ago, and especially if you're on this Zoom call, so then you also appreciate it, or else you probably wouldn't be on the call. So you definitely appreciate what Yerushalayim is all about. But we can now understand and fully appreciate how unique Yerushalayim is to us. The different aspects of Yerushalayim, what Yerushalayim means to all of us. That's what we should be focusing on, is trying to somehow grasp in ourselves the special meaning of Yerushalayim to each of us, that it shouldn't be something abstract that we just assume is something unique. But why is Yerushalayim special to you? And maybe that should be the discussion tonight at our Shabbos table. What is so special about Yerushalayim? Force people to grapple with what Yerushalayim means to them, and recognize the times that we're living in, that we get to see Yerushalayim. And I'll end with this one halacha. There's a halacha that we rip our shirts. We mentioned it earlier before, when we see the Temple Mount. If we haven't seen the Temple Mount in more than 30 days, so then we rip our shirts. And we also, there's halacha that we rip it when we see old Yerushalayim. And the poskim grapple with this idea that what does it mean, a destroyed Yerushalayim? What defines a destroyed Yerushalayim? And Rav Moshe Feinstein talks about what it means is, it doesn't mean that the buildings are destroyed, and it doesn't mean if the buildings are rebuilt. But it means that Yerushalayim would be under Jewish control. That if Yerushalayim is under Jewish control, that's what it means to have a rebuilt Jerusalem, or at least a Jerusalem that's not under destruction, and one that we wouldn't have to rip. And that's the times that we live in now. And none less than Rav Moshe Feinstein 40 years ago wrote about how Yerushalayim is different today. Something that we know, but he codified it in halacha, that Yerushalayim is different when it's under Jewish control. So I hope very soon, we live in the time that we're living in is horrific for so many different reasons. But one of the most horrific parts of the time that we're living in today is the fact that we can't visit Yerushalayim. And I'm not just talking about people that are in Boca Raton. I'm talking about people in Eretz Yisrael. It's only recently that they reopened our country that we can go. I had it for the first time in 6 years. I hadn't seen Yerushalayim in 60 days. Whenever I drive out of my town, essentially I'm going to be driving through Yerushalayim and see Yerushalayim. It was the first time in 6 years, and I had to rip. And it's a horrific time to be in. But take a step back, and when this is all over and this all passes us by, think about coming back to Yerushalayim, experiencing Yerushalayim, having that gravitational pull draw you into Yerushalayim. And that's something that we should think about and contemplate today. Yerushalayim, and again, I want to throw in a pitch here for all of Yehuda v'Shomron, because this is all of Judea and Samaria was resettled starting today. So that's it. And I want to thank Rabbi Goldberg and Rabbi Moskowitz again for having me, for the entire Boca Raton community for tuning in. And I have to tell you, I'm going to throw in a pitch here because I know Rabbi Moskowitz is about to throw it in, but I'm going to step in front of him. But the next speaker, Rabbi Lightstone, that Rabbi Goldberg will be interviewing, you're going to want to hear every word that he says. He's a Torah scholar. He's also an ordained rabbi. He used to be probably one of the best employees NCSY ever had. And but also today, the work that he is doing is he is a very modest person. So you always hear about the ambassador, but what he is doing is incredible work. And you're going to want to hear every word that he has to say about what's happening today in Yerushalayim. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Rabbi Pilichowski, also my old roommate, for those who want to know that you.
Not me, Rabbi Lightstone.
No, not you.